Thank you, Mike, and thanks for giving us the opportunity to host to all you guys. I'm going to try to get these messages to stop popping up on the screen, but as you heard from Mike, I have a couple of different departments I work with, so I apologize. None of them will interrupt you. However, you may see things pop up on my screen that I am really not in control of. What I was asked to do today, as long as I know everyone can hear me, what I was asked to do today was to come along and either inform some of you guys as to what we do at URC and remind some other ones that may have worked with us a while ago as to what we do. A couple of things, warning shots across the bow. This is not a technical training. We're not doing any programming here. However, if you have a question about capabilities, as Mike said, throw it in the Q&A box and we'll address them at the end. I'll at least say, yes, you can do it, or no, you can't do it. And I'll tell you, hey, call tech support or watch a video and you can see it here. So what I'm going to spend time doing is talking about both of our two product lines that we sell through distribution, which, as you can see on the screen, are Complete Control and MX-HomePro. We're going to talk about each of those lines individually because they really do different things. And then we're going to tell you at the end where to get some resources. Then we'll spend some time answering your questions and send you on your way. I'll do my best to talk a little slower. I am from New York, and I do tend, especially when I get passionate about things, to talk fast. So although we said Q&A is at the end, if anyone thinks I'm talking too fast, too low, too loud, that is something that we'll hear directly from Sean from ADI, who's also joining us in this meeting. So all of that being said, we're going to start off by talking about Complete Control, which is why you'll notice the MX-HomePro disappears. But before we go there, for those of you that don't know who URC is, I want to tell you a little bit about us. So I just have to hide the screen, bear with me. So a little bit about us. First of all, we've been in business at this point, well over 30 years. Not even 25. 25 years ago is about when we decided to really enter the home theater / universal remote business. We actually were working with, believe it or not, microwaves before that. So what you need to know about us today is that we are a leading supplier of not just smart home technology. We also do a lot of OEM work for cable companies, TV manufacturers to make their remotes for them. As a matter of fact, one of the things you can feel very comfortable telling customers that are looking at URC that may not have heard us, chances are if they're not currently using a remote that we made, I can almost guarantee you that they have used a remote we made, whether it's a Comcast remote, whether it's an Optimum remote, whether it's a Toshiba remote or an LG remote. We had our hands in most of those. As a matter of fact, we do so much remote manufacturing that we have although we're based in New York, that's where administrative offices are. We have factories in both Korea and Mexico, depending upon the product line we're working on. The more complex products tend to get built in Korea, where we have a little more control over the manufacturing process. And the rest of the products get made in Mexico, especially a lot of the cable remotes. As I mentioned, we've been in business more than 30 years, but we've been delivering home automation and control to our industry, our CI industry, for over 25 years. And we have, at this point, close to 30 million remotes sold during that time. 100 million remotes if you include all the cable. I always want to be fair with this number because there aren't that many people in the country. The 100 million remotes is when you combine all our OEM manufacturing as well as CI industry. In the CI industry, it's closer to almost 30 million remotes at this point. So that being said, just a little bit about who URC is. I also want to talk a little bit about what we do and how we go to market before we talk about our products. URC only sells to this channel. We do not deal directly with the consumer at all, which means when a consumer calls us and they have a problem with their remote, we directly refer them to reach out to their local dealers, look it up online, local dealers, and get in touch with a dealer to program the remote. We do not give our software out to end users unless it's a 12-year-old remote that no dealer wants to service anyway. Then we do have standalone editors we can hand out to the end user, but we don't support them. And as a matter of fact, we'll talk about our URC portal in a bit, which is where you can access software and other resources. I'll explain that at the end. Only dealers can join. And we'll talk more about that at the end as we talk about the URC portal. So all of that being said, the main thing I want to talk about is by far the line that almost every installer in the industry that's been in there for a while knows, which is our complete control line. Some people call it our MX series products, since all of the remotes here start with MX. We call it complete control because that's the software that's used to program all of these remotes. This line is comprised of essentially two different sides. We have the base stations and we have the handheld remotes. You know, although the handheld remotes will work without a base station, the base stations are virtually useless without some sort of user interface, and we'll talk about those as well. As a matter of fact, the base stations are the first thing we're going to talk about, which is how they would work in a typical home. I know some of you guys are very aware of this because I am sure that a lot of you have already done this product, so consider this a reminder. The way that base stations work is all our remotes have the ability to send an RF signal out, as well as IR. So when you set your remote up, you can set it up to send out a command direct IR, which is reasonable as long as you don't mind having your customers having to aim the remote. If you use RF, of course, no aiming is required. The one thing we do ask our dealers is that when they program a system, to try to do all devices only to one of the ways, not to mix and match. As a good example, if you set up a macro, and I hope I'm not using a term that you guys are unfamiliar with, if you set up a macro or sequence of events, if one of the devices in the middle is an IR only device and they hit a button and everything turns off, they could end up putting the remote down and going into the couch cushions before that IR signal comes out of it, at which point it won't reach the TV or the AVR or whatever it's connected to. So we actually recommend for bulletproof operation that you choose one method, although you can mix and match if you'd like or your situation calls for it. So the base station then receives that RF, converts it back to IR, and sends it out to the devices that you have connected to it. And you have a couple of different options with that we're going to talk about in a moment. What this lets you do, though, it lets you either hide equipment or it lets you control things from a distance. For example, a second zone of an AVR, you could bring the remote out to the patio or to the deck and control your second zone without having to worry about going into the house and aiming it right at the AVR. I hope that's clear to everyone. That's the core of how our RF works. Remember, not necessary, but I would tell you, based upon what we see being purchased, I would tell you about 80 to 90% of remotes are sold with some base station, and I'll give you what our two options are for the base stations and why they're better. I pause a little bit to let everything digest with you guys. Any urgent questions coming up, Sean? I'm sure you'll jump in, but if no one has urgent questions, I will now talk about the MRF 350, which is our top of the line RF base station. The reason we consider it top of the line is multiple things. First of all, it has 6 different IR emitters, and all of them are adjustable for some devices that are a little finicky. You can actually put up to, and we'll talk about this in a little bit also, you can actually put up to 15 of these in the home where they could work, where they won't interfere with each other. So you literally could have one remote controlling 15 small zones as long as they're within RF range. Some other things to think about here, since we mentioned RF range, the MRF 350, although it comes with a single antenna, actually had the ability to wire in series 3 separate antennas. When I was a dealer, there were many homes before a whole house control was out. There were many homes where I'd put like a little triangle up in the attic of 3 of these antennas and put remotes all over the house that can control any room in the house. And literally it was, I'm talking 10 years ago, or no, more than that, 12 or 15 years ago, was essentially a whole house remote control system just using RF. Other things about the 350, we do also include a front IR blaster in case you want to maybe hit a projector, you can't get a wire there. What we also do here is, although you can use 3 antennas, we actually have the antenna separate. What we notice, and what you'll see on the other base station we talk about, when the antenna is built into the base station, typically because the base station is putting out infrared, people put it close to all the gear, which makes total sense. The problem you have is all of that gear that you put it close to also exhibits, also, not exhibits, what's the word I'm looking for? Sends out, emits is the word I'm looking for, also emits a tremendous amount of RF interference. So the smartest place to keep an antenna is going to be outside of the rack or outside of where all the gear is. The MRF 350 allows you to separate the antenna from the base station to get the best reception. As long as that's clear. And by the way, this retails for $249. The less expensive piece, which is the 260, you lose a couple things. You only get 4 IR outs. I'm holding up 3. I should be holding up 4. 4 IR outs. Only 2 of them are variable. Although you can still hook up to 15 of these in a house, or 15 between this and the 350. The antenna is built onto the unit, which means, honestly, I would suggest mounting this like above the rack or a distance away and running IR cables over to the devices. Because I will tell you, one of the biggest complaints we have with the 260 is interference. And the problem you have with the RF interference, a lot of times it doesn't exhibit until all the devices are on. So before you leave a system with an MRF 260, turn on all the devices in the system and make sure your RF is still working fine. Because at that point, all the devices there are putting out all the RF they could be putting out. And at least then you can narrow down and maybe move the antenna to get better reception. So those are really the only 2 base stations in regards to RF that we offer with our complete control product. There is one other base station that we do not have pictured here, and it's for a very specific reason. It gets a little complicated. We do also offer an MRX2, which is a base station without an antenna. It's network capable, and it really is only needed if you're going to use an iOS or Android device for control, which is possible. That's a little more advanced topic that I want to get into during this webinar because I didn't want to bog us down with all those details. What you should know here is that Android and iOS control are absolutely possible. You can always call tech support to learn how to do it, but you would need a different base station to make that happen. So as long as we're clear on that, I can talk about the core parts of our complete control line and what they all offer. So that being said, we're really only here to talk about 4 different units. CCP products do have a couple other ones, but these by far are our best sellers, and I'll even tell you why each of these are our best sellers. So the MX-780, which is our least expensive piece, is the first one we're going to talk about. And the reason this is the best seller, maybe even the best seller, is simply put, it is the least expensive remote that you can get that is PC programmable. So here's what you need to know about this MX-780. The screen is only a 1.5-inch screen. It is not a touch screen, but that's why it comes in at the price it comes in at. Like all our remotes, it is capable of both direct IR as well as RF transmission, and it does require 4 AA batteries. What you'll see on all of our remotes is all of our remotes handle many more devices and commands that you would really ever need. So as a minimum, this already supports 48 devices with 8 pages of commands per device, which means it's already probably more than you need in terms of capabilities to control those devices. Now, this little box in the corner here that you see goes over some of the other key things to know about this when you remember what this is. And hopefully, if you look at the webinar in the future, this will work as a reminder. In terms of logic, it has very little logic, if any logic. You really can't do variables very well here if you guys ever want to do variables. In terms of its graphics, it only lets you choose from a graphic library, so maybe 3 or 4 different cable boxes, and with the screen being so small, we didn't feel the need to give you 1,000 different pieces of cable box for you to choose from. So you do have graphics to choose from, but it is from our graphics library. The screen we already talked about, and the batteries we already talked about. So that being said, this is where we start, and it's a very popular remote. What I would tell you, before the last 2 years, this was the most popular remote. What surprised everyone here at URC is we decided to put out a little bit of a higher end remote to kind of replace the 980, but like $50 cheaper, for those of you that remember the 980. The 890 has, in the last 2 years, now this has become our #1 selling remote. It is a $200 MSRP difference, but I'm going to talk about what you pick up here. So the first thing is, forget about the IRRF. You're going to see that on every remote, but it's part of what it does. The rechargeable batteries and the base could single-handedly be worth the price difference, not because someone spends $200 worth of batteries, but because as long as you hang it up on the base, you're probably good for 3 to 5 days worth of battery power. And if you remember to hang it up every night, it works flawlessly. The other thing that people like about this, especially end users, is they like the larger screen. And dealers, because we have a larger screen, we also give you the ability to choose from a larger library of graphics, as well as import your own graphics if you feel you'd like to. So a good example here is, you notice how small these buttons here. This strictly was a custom program we had here that didn't fill the screen up. It didn't make it look as crowded. So I wanted to show you that you could fill up each of the button spaces, or you can make it a little more discreet if you have customers that want that. All of these remotes let you pick the font you want to use, let you pick the font size, font color. Really, you could do almost anything you want in terms of customization on these remotes. Although it's not a free form. You can't put like 12 buttons on one page and one button on another page. You are locked down to a 6-button layout. You could bring it down to 1 button, but you'd have to pick a location for that button. Other than that, we also automatically include the ability to do sleep timers. So you can essentially make a button that when your customer hits it will automatically show up and say, hey, when do you want to turn off the system? And then after that amount of time, it'll activate whatever macro you program, which would typically be turn off all the things in the room. Besides that, you can also make event timers where you can set macros to happen at certain times of the day. All these things aren't possible with the 780. On top of that, if you decide to dive this deep, we also can track variables and use conditional logic, which essentially is if-else statements. So I told you this was not going to be a technical webinar, but I'd like to give at least an example of when these if-else statements can be powerful. A good example is when you build a macro to watch cable TV, the first thing it typically does, even in a basic system, it turns on the TV, then turns on the cable box. So if you also build a macro to watch Blu-ray, the first step in that macro is to turn the TV on. Now, if the TV is already on, you're wasting the power on command as well as the whatever second delay you would put into that macro to wait while the TV powers up. A lot of our dealers use variables to track when the TV is turned on. So that way, when they go to activate a macro, they say, hey, if the TV's already on, don't wait the 7 seconds. Just go right on to turn the DVD player on or right to turn the cable box on. So it allows you to do things and track things and do custom reactions based upon variables. So many possibilities, we can't talk about them all. However, there are a lot of things you can do with variables, and a lot of our dealers use variables on practically every job. So based upon the success of the 890, we decided to come up with even more of a step up unit here. And pardon me, I just noticed I did not change the price on the bottom. The MSRP here is $550. Sorry guys, I was fixing this presentation yesterday and I forgot to do that. What people like about this remote, this actually is a direct replacement for the 980 in this regard. First of all, the screen is a full 2.4-inch bright display. We give you 8 buttons per page as opposed to 6 buttons per page. And because all the buttons are bigger, the graphics here are incredible when you bring in your own graphics. All the other stuff is very much the same as you found on the 890, but there's only a $50 price difference between these units. And this unit feels really good in your hand. And for those of you that have used the 980 and have loved the 980, it was always a bit of a chunkier remote that some people hated. But I would tell you that overall, most people loved because it felt solid in your hand, and it didn't require having to look at the remote. After the first day's worth of use, you didn't have to even look at the remote anymore. You knew where all the buttons were. And that's, a remote in our mind is an extension of your hand when you're watching TV. If you have to look at the remote to do all your commands, which is why not a big fan of touchscreens. If you have to look at the remote, it takes away from the viewing experience. And I'd much prefer to have a remote I don't have to look at, and I just know where all the buttons are. So those three main units, the 780, 890, and 990, are the core 3 units in our CCP line. There are some other units that, up and down a little bit, like the MX-900, which are good remotes, but these are the 3 big ones, and the ones that are really worth, I can really explain the price difference between them pretty realistically if you're trying to sell to your customers. The final remote to talk about isn't any better than the 990, but it is a solution piece, which is why it's been so popular, especially in the South and during the summer. That is our 920 remote. The 920 is our water-resistant remote that literally floats. It, again, does that IR RF. Unfortunately, what you'll see here is the display is a little archaic. What we did find is that this black and white display for outside tends to work better. So we decided to keep it here. This remote also only supports up to 40 devices. So this is a tough one if you want to do, 8 rooms. You may not get all your devices here. The battery panel actually screws down, and it has a watertight seal on it. And this remote is, again, right around this time of year is when we start seeing the sales for this remote really start picking up, as people are opening up their pools, opening up their hot tubs, etc. So, by the way, really quick example, I know at least one dealer that sealed up their hot tub with this in it, and the next year, it still worked. I will tell you, it did wear some of the finish off the remote sitting in that water and whatever you put in the water so it stays good over the winter. Whatever was in there, it made it. It still worked, but some of the paint didn't do as well as it could have. So we don't recommend leaving it for 8 months in a hot tub, but it should still work. All of that being said, I want to talk a little bit about how you should design a project around this, around all of these remotes. And honestly, even for when I was a dealer, I used both of these concepts pretty regularly because that long ago, I know I don't look that old, but I've been doing this for a while. That long ago, there was not any real whole house control content. So the way to do it was using URC products way before I worked here to accomplish a similar result. So the first thing is you could use a single base station with multiple remotes. This is really good as one of the examples I brought up before, which is a second zone. So you could have one remote programmed to control the second zone of a receiver, maybe leave that out on the patio, an MXW 920 remote, and the other one in your home theater, maybe a 990, and have both of them talk to the same base station. What I've done for people, because I always want to squeeze every last cent out of a project, I've custom programmed different remotes for husband and wife, or husband, wife, and kids that only have the buttons that they would need to access the most. Another fine way to design this, especially if someone doesn't mind paying to have their own customized remote, I would sell the remote. We don't like leaving money on the table as dealers. However, the most popular use of the multi-remote scenario or the multi-base station scenario is really something else I brought up earlier, which is the ability to control multiple zones or many different rooms of equipment with a single remote. I'm going to talk a little bit about this because this doesn't really explain it as well as it could be explained. If you recall earlier, the 2 remotes that I mentioned, the 890 and the 990, both have the ability to do variables. One of the big benefits of variables isn't just to track the state of a device. You can also program it, which is what I did when I was a dealer, to know what room it's in. So let me give you a perfect example. When I would sell a system, a 6-room system to a customer, what I would do, as opposed to making a different program for every room in the house, I made one program that control all of the rooms, and then on the main page of the remote, I would make them choose the room they wanted to control. So what the benefit you had there is that any remote they picked up could control any room in the house, But you can't do that without variables, because that first button press where you say I'm controlling the den, you're going to store in a variable control equals den, for example. And then it's going to know where to jump. It'll jump to the den page, and no matter what you do, unless you what I used to do is I used to program my select button. If I hold my select button down or the main button down for more than 5 seconds, I'd go back to that main page to let me select a room. So it would have to track what room it's in, and it's very possible to do that. The benefit here is it's one program for the whole house, and if they lose a remote or the batteries die on a remote in one room, they can easily walk into another room, hold the select button down or whatever button you choose for X amount of time, have it go back to the main menu, select the room they want to control, and then there it is. It's a more efficient way to do this, and it really helps you maximize the sale. So I'll tell you what we're going to do, only because we're talking about 2 product lines. And Sean, I hope you're okay with this. I know we said we wait till the end to take questions. We're at the end of a section. So before we go into MX-HomePro, so we don't confuse the 2 lines, if there are any burning questions, I'd like to take the opportunity to answer them now. If there aren't, I'll move right on to MX-HomePro.
Hi, Russ. So I've been answering a couple of them in the chat box. I think everyone's muted, so they won't be able to ask it. But if anyone's got additional questions, feel free to type them in to the Q&A box, and we can address those. I don't see anything right now, Russ, that's not been answered.
Thank you.
So I think we're good.
Okay, then I'll move on to our MX-HomePro line. But by the way, I would tell you that I told Sean and Mike, I don't know if I can talk for 45 minutes to an hour. I don't know if I have that much stuff. I forgot how much I can keep talking. So we're already at 12:30, so I apologize. We won't run late, but I'm taking up time here. So our MX-HomePro, I'll tell you a little bit about how this started. And this really started as kind of we were trying to find a way to do whole house the smartest way, as opposed to depending upon RF. What we noticed, and what we use in some of our other product lines, is we noticed that the one thing that goes through the whole house in a modern home is network. So I'm going to back up and mention complete control. One of the benefits or downsides, depending how you look at it, is it is a completely off the network solution, which means you don't have to have any networking knowledge to program a complete control system and do anything we just talked about. MX-HomePro is network dependent, which means there has to be some familiarity with networking in order to get this to work. So that could be one way to worry about the distinguishing thing between the both lines. However, MX-HomePro also gives you some other capabilities, which I'm going to mention right now, if you're willing to dive into the world of networking. So MX-HomePro, as I mentioned, is a network-based system, which means, at least for us, it is a cloud-based system. You don't have to have any software stored on your computer. The software is all designed cloud-based. It's designed for professionals, and we consider you guys professionals. In other words, this is another line we do not distribute or let our end users program. We've actually have Wi-Fi remotes because we developed a technology called, called Quick Start, not called Quick Connect, thank you, called Quick Connect, that lets the remote connect to your network and control the system within a quarter of a second. The programming is still step-based programming and fairly easy programming. With this, you have the ability to control your system from apps, whether it's on a tablet or a phone, and as many of those in a house as you would like. When I say that, we've never tested it over like 100 or 150. So take that with a grain of salt, but probably more than you would ever need. And since we are cloud-based programming, you can make updates from off-site. So if your customer says, I need a new macro, you can do that from off-site. And we also include for free the ability for a homeowner to control their system from off-site using the app. So all of this stuff is part of MX-HomePro, but a little bit about it. Really, we designed this because everyone's talking about connected homes. And we wanted to give someone the ability to control not just audio and video, which is what you get in complete control, but also smart devices, lights, locks, etc. So MX-HomePro is really diving into that. What I tend to break this down into when I talk to any professionals in this business, I break it down to CIA because it's easy to remember: control, integration, and automation. Uh, Although each of the lines that we have does a little bit of the other, I would tell you that CCP is mainly a control line. MX-HomePro is control and integration. And our premier lines, which we don't sell through distribution, would add maybe automation onto that afterwards. So let's talk about MX-HomePro and what you can do with it. MX-HomePro being network-based means we can have what we call two-way modules. And you'll see a sample of what some of that stuff is on the right over there. We have the ability to control Ecobee thermostats, for example. Right from your remote, you can open up Ecobee, you can adjust the temperature up and down, lighting, Z-Wave that we're going to talk about, Doorbird, doorbells. We are working currently with Ring. They just opened up their API, so we will have Ring at some point in the future. Popular music systems like Sonos and Hios are on here. I use mine to control my Philips Hue bulbs, including the light wheel and everything. You can do a lot of stuff right from the remote. The one thing I'd like to warn people about is all of these companies we just mentioned, they all have apps. Their apps are much more inclusive and comprehensive than our two-way modules, and that is by design. All of these companies have full teams dedicated to making their app perfect. We have a team that is in charge of making sure we get as many of these apps as possible into the system and don't go too deep. A good example is, and we got complaints early on when Nest was available, that, hey, listen, how come I can't set my schedule on Nest? Well, we can't build all that into a two-way module. You can control Nest, turn it on or off, adjust your temperature. If you want to set the schedule for when it turns on or off, use the Nest app. That's what it's for. So we can never be as good as each of these individual apps, but the concept here is integration. One remote to control lights, locks, shades, and AV, not to do every single thing on each of those in each of those categories. I hope that makes sense, but I'm trying to set expectations right so people don't think you can do everything in their app that you could do on our system. So that all being said, there are a couple of ways you can work with this, and I'll show you all the pieces in a moment. So you can start off with a basic system, which is $300 retail, which is what we call a hub that we'll talk about in a moment, using iOS and Android app. By the way, it is a good solution. Everything we talked about you can do. However, personal experience, I do not think this is a smart way to control an AV part of the system, because every time a commercial comes on, if you want to hit mute or you want to fast forward, to have to unlock your phone, go to the now playing device and control it, seems like a lot of effort. We actually recommend the better or best solution, not because they're more money, but because they offer the homeowner the right solution to what they're trying to do. The better solution, you pick up our basic remote, which is a good remote, but for $150 more, and you can see the form factor very similar to what you saw in our CCP remotes. When you go to our best solution, you get a better remote with a charging base and a bigger screen. So all the MX-HomePro also offers, again, free apps, Android or mobile. We are expandable up to 8 rooms. And when we incorporate Z-Wave, which we'll talk about in a moment, you actually gain control with over 2,000. It's probably closer to 2,400 different devices where we stand today. So we're going to start off, we're going to talk a little bit about the app. The app itself gives you, it should mirror what you see on the remote that we're going to talk about in a minute, and gives you the ability to control all your devices. And it's really easy. It's really easy to program. And we do also let you use logic here. So the same concept I talked about using logic and variables for CCP, you can easily do here, including timed events, sleep timers, the same stuff we mentioned when we talked about the in CCP. The one other thing we picked up here, since it is a internet-based system, you also picked up favorite channels. So we actually have a module that right now is free. We may come a point where we'll start charging for this, but it'll be like $6 a year. What we do right now is you can go into a device like your cable box. You can say, hey, I have cable in this zip code. You can put your favorite channels in there, and it'll actually show you all those channels. And when you tap on a button like CBS, if you hit it once or tap the button next to it once, it'll show you what's currently playing on that channel. And you hit it, you tap it again, and it'll jump to that channel. So it's almost a way to get a preview of what's on all your favorite channels without interrupting the viewing for the customer. So this is our iOS or Android. They really look the same. I would think that this would happen in every single system. The other advantage you have with MX-HomePro is you don't have to program 3 different remotes 3 different ways. You make one system and it automatically ports out to iOS, Android, or any of the remotes we're going to talk about. So I'm going to start with our best remote, the one that I think made the big difference because people were not happy about charging of the other remote, and I'll go over that in a second. The R700. This one, like I mentioned, uses Quick Connect Wi-Fi. We intentionally did not put any direct IR on the front of this, guys. And a lot of people say, why wouldn't you at least give me the capability to do direct IR? Well, it goes back to what I mentioned earlier. It's a mixed messages. If you're getting this system and you want to control things over the network, people are going to get used to not aiming their remote. You don't want to have them aim their remote for one device. You want to control everything over the network. So we intentionally took direct IR off of here. It does support all our two-way modules like Sonos, Hios, Philips Hue, all the things we talked about before. If you get our Z-Wave hub and you pair a camera to the Z-Wave hub, which you can do on that, you can also view cameras right from the remote. As I mentioned earlier, it includes a charging cradle and a fully backlit keypad. Both of those things are missing from the step-down model for $150. And as I mentioned, it's also has a Grace Note favorite channels on it. This quickly took over as our best-selling remote in this system. The R500 really has all the same capabilities. And I made another copy-paste error, gentlemen, ladies. I'm sorry, my bad. The R500 does not include a charging cradle. It has a plug-in charger, which some people hated because they'd rather have batteries and have to find the little micro USB plug that's laying on the table or on the floor and plugging it in every night. And also the keypad is not fully lit up. The actual numbers aren't lit up at all, which drove people crazy. So soon after the release of this remote, we came out with the R700. This remote was quickly relegated to secondary and tertiary rooms, where the 700 was generally in the den, master bedroom, and home theater. That's how that's how dealers generally separate between the two. All of these remotes, by the way, also have a full demo mode. So you can open it, you can buy it, open it, show it, and bring it with you to show to customers. Of course, you won't see a moving image in the camera, and you won't see the actual metadata changing on a Sonos module, for example. However, you can show them, here's all the things you can do, so they can see what the capabilities of the system are. So, although at its heart, and by the way, at the heart of what URC does, we are an AV control company. All this other stuff we added because people were saying, I want to control more than just AV. So the good thing about that is our database is second to none. You can control, we have devices in there still from like 1990. We have LaserDisc commands. Or if anyone remembers Internet TV, I think it was called, Microsoft had a little box out. We still have those commands in there. So our database is second to none. If you want to add two-way control with our two-way modules, here's just a small sampling based upon what we talked about earlier of some of the two-way modules you can include. I will give you one caveat you see that is showing up on the screen. Nest may or may not work, and here's why. Google last year decided when they took over Nest that they were going to do an update to the Nest thermostat that took it away from Works with Nest and changed it over to Works with Google. If someone has an old Nest thermostat that still works with Nest, we'll control it fine. When Google took them over, they closed the API out, and won't let anyone control Nest anymore. Recently, they said they were going to go back on that, but it hasn't happened yet. So just warning you, when you see Nest there, some will work, some won't, and that's really not up to us. That's up to any of our partners or any of the devices allowing any control system or integration system in to control and or get feedback from that. Okay, so as we're winding down, we also, I mentioned earlier, Z-Wave. We decided as a company to go into Z-Wave because this was the easiest solution to incorporate. People are, homeowners are already familiar with this, and all of this is controllable through our MX-HomePro system. For those of you unfamiliar with Z-Wave, I'm going to give you resources in a bit where you can learn a little more. We're not going to go over all the details here, other than to let you know that Z-Wave is easily capable of controlling lighting, whether it's interior, exterior, door locks, which are super popular. I would hate to live in my house right now without having an automated door lock, and sensors, reacting to motion sensors, turning TVs off if there's no motion in the room for X amount of time. It does work with cameras that have what's called the ZIP protocol, Z-Wave over IP protocol. And it also works with a lot of brands of thermostats and motorized shades. What you have the ability to do is create one-touch Z-Wave scenes that you can then access with our MX-HomePro system. And you can even incorporate geofencing, where when you get to a certain point, maybe your lights come on and your TV comes on when you get within, a half a mile of your home. All more details to be shared once you go and read up or watch a little more videos on Z-Wave. Also, because everyone wanted it, we are a control company and we are a remote control company. So this does nothing for anyone's bottom line, maybe for you guys, which is why we did it. We do integrate currently with both Alexa as well as Google Assistant. The way we integrate, though, has some positives and negatives. The positive is you can set any macro you want to be Alexa responsive. We signed up early on with Alexa to actually grab the keywords turn on and turn off. So you can build any macro that'll respond to you saying, Alexa, turn on, whatever phrase you want after that, and then whatever macro you want after that. So you can really use common phrases like turn on and turn off to activate anything through MX-HomePro. Google Assistant, a little more complicated. However, with Google Assistant, you can also include custom responses. So you actually can say, hey, when someone says turn off TV, you can say, hey, good night, Russ. Hope you get a great night's sleep. You can do things like that, which you cannot do with Alexa. They don't let you. So we do a variety of voice control integration. We're looking at Josh AI. We just don't know if it's ready for prime time yet. Based on sales and their expectations, it may actually stay that way. So really briefly, as we're running out of time, and I apologize, as we're running out of time, I'll talk about the H500 hub, which is the brains of the system. Without this hub, you can do nothing else. It is network connected, but it can work via Wi-Fi. It does have to get initially set up via wired so we can get all the Wi-Fi information. You only need one of these to get started. We support up to 8 rooms of hubs and up to 3 hubs in every room in case you need more IR ports. So with 3 hubs in every room, you get 12 IR ports. And by the way, a lot of those will support dual emitters as long as your piece isn't too demanding from the IR, doesn't need a really hot IR signal. And it also has a front blaster on it. So really do cover in a typical 8-room house. We'll cover you any way you want to do this. This is small enough to mount and hide, but I'd warn you again about where you decide to mount and hide. If you have this thing set to Wi-Fi, hiding it behind a TV set is convenient. However, that TV set will typically block a lot of your Wi-Fi 2.4 gig signal. So just be smart and realize you may have to move this to make sure you get the best reception. I cannot control environmental issues. Mobile, we already talked about. It's a bit of a repeat here. You do have the ability to switch. Remember how I said you can work with 8 rooms? Well, with a remote, It's easy because each remote's dedicated to a room. With the app, you do have a button that'll let you switch to control to now control another room. And this is just an example of it. You click the room you want to control, and it controls it. We also have what we call an in-app launcher. We have the ability by hitting this button on the app to actually open up any other app you want. So if you want to make sure your customer can easily get to, as we mentioned before, maybe the Sonos app, because what we have may not be as all-inclusive as a Sonos app, we can actually include it here so that way a customer doesn't have to kind of leave the URC Sonos environment and go to iOS or Android in order to get where they want to go. And as I mentioned earlier, to remind you, cloud-based. After initial setup, you can make changes. Homeowners will automatically get offsite control using their app. So that same example before where someone was switching into living room control could do that from the office if they want, which, by the way, really means nothing for audio video. However, to be able to turn on your hot tub when you're leaving work, as an example, or turn on your outside lights because someone's coming over to visit and you're still at the office, are all small things you can do. This little caveat here about offsite Z-Wave control, I want to be clear on this. If you're controlling Z-Wave through MX-HomePro, you do not have to pay that. However, if you want, our Z-Wave gateway has its own separate app that gives you more detailed control. If you want to use a standalone app, which you may or may not need, there is a small $25 a year fee to use that. Most of our dealers don't ever find the need to do that because they build custom buttons in MX-HomePro to do all the different lighting scenes, at which point you don't need offsite control. So to kind of wrap it up, that's what MX-HomePro does. Remember, you still have your 3 different options as to what you would like to do. My suggestion, guys, I know this is counterintuitive to what you think URC would start with. If you want to start cheap, don't start with the better, because there's no way once that remote's open, anyone's going to take it back. If you want to start cheap, start good with the good section. Once they realize that app control sucks for TV viewing, sell them the better remote. So you'll go from good to best, and you won't ever touch better, because their experience on the best is so much better for the small difference in price, well worth the money. And all of that being said, before I end, I want to give you guys a couple of resources, and then I'll end and take any questions you have. So, first of all, in order to reach out to us, our tech support is open 9 to 6 Eastern, and that is the number to reach us. It's all over our website, so don't worry if you don't write it down. What I'll also tell you is other ways to reach out to us. You can always email us. I've been beating up the guys. Remember, I'm in charge of tech support also, to answer these emails as quickly as possible, because I'd much rather get an email and find the answer to the question before I call the customer back or the dealer back. So feel free to call us, by the way. 98% of calls about CCP all get resolved on that initial phone call. If you email us, please understand and give us 24 hours to respond. We're typically faster, but just in case. And if not, you can always put a ticket on online. Now, I did give you a link here to the URC portal. However, if you're not a member, you'll have to actually go into the upper right-hand corner where it says register, and it's going to ask you information about your dealership. We try not to be too intrusive, but we do ask for some documentation that you actually are a dealer. And by the way, I hate that. I don't want to make it difficult for you guys to join our URC portal, but there's a lot of information there that we don't want to give out to end users. So if we don't verify that you're a dealer and go through that process, we don't want to see end users lying to us and jumping on here and getting the software, learning how to program, and essentially not needing your guys' services anymore. So the delay here is so we can make sure you are a dealer. So it's not 100%. It's like a car alarm. It's a deterrent. We want to make sure that 95% of the people on the URC portal are legitimate dealers. So I apologize if the first time. If you know you have a job next week, sign up ahead of time to get all the stuff you need, and don't wait on it. What you can find there, I do see someone raise their hand. We'll get to you in a second. What you will find on the portal besides the software, you'll find a boatload of training for both MX-HomePro as well as CCP that leads you through all the technical steps of programming a system. And the good news is, if that doesn't do it for you, feel free to call tech support. And before I answer the question, I'll give you my instructions to tech support. We are not training support. I'm not here to teach someone everything about a system. I do want people to watch the videos first. However, if you have a specific question or two questions, I can't do these two things, feel free, let us help you before you get too frustrated and call us up all aggravated because you spent 3 hours not being able to solve the problem. We're probably going to be able to solve it much faster and save you some time, which I'd rather do, get you done with your job faster. Now, honestly, that is really my whole presentation. I saw someone raise their hand, so I'll be glad to do it. But before we do that, as we're getting ready for this, I wanted to give Sean Dixon from ADI a chance to speak a little bit, and I wanted to officially thank him yet again for this. And because he let us do this, I'd like to give him a little time to say what he has to say before we answer the questions.
All right, thanks, Russ. Appreciate you running everybody through this great training. First and foremost, I hope everybody is safe and healthy out there. Not only with the COVID-19, but with the events that have happened over the past couple of weeks with protesting. So hopefully everybody is staying out of harm's way and staying safe from all that. So as Russ mentioned, I'm Sean Dixon. I'm the Director of AV Programs at ADI. One of the things that I do and manage is manage the AV Elite program. If you're not familiar with it, we would love to get you some more information on it. It also can be found on our website, but essentially it's a reward program for doing business with ADI with your AV needs. So each year the vendor lineup changes from year to year, or can change. I'm happy to say URC is one of our vendor partners in the program this year, and I believe has been for a number of years. So thank you, Russ.
Many years.
Yeah, and everybody at URC for that. Feel free to check it out. It's being updated on the dealer side of our website, but you could also drop an email to avelite@adiglobal.com, and we'll get back with you with more details if you're not currently in it and want some more information. So aside from that, also wanted to mention, in addition to URC tech support, we've got our award-winning systems group in both the US and Canada. They're always there for some pre-application, pre-sale support if and when you need them. Hopefully you've used them a time or two over the years. They've been around for 25 years plus now. And then last but not least, Russ spent a lot of time talking about home theater, whole house control, but with a lot of these products, they also make sense in commercial applications such as sports bars and so forth. And to that end, if you're not familiar with our Pro AV team, we have a dedicated Pro AV team both in the field and an inside team that sits in Louisville, Kentucky, that can help with any of your Pro AV needs if you need it. So whether you're primarily a residential AV dealer, maybe you're not as comfortable in the commercial space, or you're in commercial and you come across a project where you need a little extra assistance with, reach out to us. We can help. We've got a brand new Pro AV line card too. We'd love to share with you. So you can always send an email to proav@adiglobal.com, and somebody will get back with you as well on that. So
Sean, I want to jump in. I was a little remiss. I'm sorry if I don't mean to interrupt. I cannot believe the number of commercial jobs our CCP products are in. It is such an economical solution to control 20 TVs at a bar. I would say light commercial, we are, the bars I go to around here, just around here, every other bar I go to has a URC complete control system in it. It's crazy.
Mm-hmm.